Well, welcome to Marty Time TV, everyone. I'm Marty Caswell. That's Dylan Hernandez from the LA Times. This interview is specifically for baseball fans, Shohei Ohtani fans, Padres fans, and that's pretty much it. Hey, Dylan, what did we learn about Shohei Ohtani and what he wants during your time at the All-Star Game?
Nothing. maybe that he doesn't want to be asked about this stuff. It's funny because I didn't hear it when I asked the question, but at some point I just kind of asked him, well, what do you, whether, regardless of whether you stay with the Angels, leave, whatever it is, when you're deciding where you want to, spend the next however many years, what, are you prioritizing? What do you want? And he kind of gave one of these, well, I haven't even thought of it yet, blah, blah, blah. Now, he said this under his breath, so I didn't hear it when he said it.
Mm-hmm.
But later, the mic that I had there picked it up when he said something like, I don't even understand the question. No, of course he understood the question, right? And it was kind of more, I think, in the spirit of, I can't answer that, right? I can't talk about that. So, yeah, I think, that said, yeah, it's, he did obviously talk about wanting to win, I think that that's still kind of true. I think that with where the Angels kind of were maybe 3-4 weeks ago, maybe that door was still kind of cracked open. It's kind of weird though, right? The way just that they have collapsed here in the last 3 weeks. I mean, it's almost kind of supernatural-ish, which is why I asked him hey, do you believe in curses? Because it almost feels like with the Angels, even, and I think, again, that Paraminasian, the GM there, did a lot of good things in terms of how he reconfigured the bullpen, how he added length to the lineup. Even some of the young players that came up, Neto, Ohtani, played well. You could argue that they're trending in the right direction, and then everybody gets hurt, right? Everybody got hurt.
In San Diego.
Yeah, so it's kind of when you look at that, I'm just kind of wondering, right? Because I think those of us, who have been around Southern California for a long time, you look at the Angels and you just think they just are never going to figure it out, right? Even if they figure it out, something's going to go wrong, and right, they inspire that kind of feeling. So I was a little bit curious, if Ohtani, how he felt about that, but their PR people kind of cut off that line of questioning. So
the Dylan Shield.
Yeah, the Dylan Shields. So,
if that had not happened with the injuries with Mike Trout and with Rendon, two guys who have been injured a lot, are we having a conversation about him resigning with the Angels?
Yeah, and I think, Rendon, I think, is already, honestly, he's kind of a lost cause, right? I mean, they just haven't gotten anything out of him. But it's not even, it's Trout, it's Neto, the rookie shortstop, right? Ohtani, the rookie catcher, and they just kind of just lost a lot there. Urshela, right, who actually was playing really good defense and was hitting well, right? And actually, when he went down, it kind of forced them to play Rendon. They had to count on this guy they couldn't count on. Yeah, I do think so because, I think that one thing that's kind of important to remember, I think, is just the way this kid is kind of wired, right? When he came out of high school, most likely it looked like he was kind of leaning towards Dodgers to sign with them out of high school. He had even told teams in Japan, don't draft me, I'm going to the major leagues. And Nippon Ham, the team in Japan that wound up signing him, got convinced him to stay because, we'll give you the chance to play both ways. Now, when he broke into baseball in Japan, not everybody was on board with this, right? You kind of have, you have the old grumps, the Goose Gossages that are always coming out and talking
back in
about
my day, right?
Back in my day. Yeah. So and again, in a society that respects, their elders and all that type of stuff, you can just kind of imagine how much more suffocating the pressure is from people like that, right? And there were some Hall of Fame players who kind of came out and said he can't do this, went as far as to say it was disrespectful, and he kind of put his blinders on and I'm going to do this, right? And he faced that again when he was coming over to the major leagues. I think at that point people were, there were some people over there who were saying, it's not as easy over there as it is over here. You're not going to be able to play both ways. And he's kind of put on his blinders and kind of gone forward, and I think, one thing that kind of what I remember is when I went to go visit his high school coach in 2017, it was his last year in Japan, and I made a detour to his high school alma mater. And, at some point in the conversation, I kind of flippantly said, well, he's going to end up with the Dodgers or Yankees, right? And, the coach said, I don't think so, right? Because, again, in Japan, they recruit nationally for high school baseball, and the big schools are in Osaka, Yokohama, usually are the two kind of, the centers of power there. And it's like he could have gone to one of those schools. He stayed here locally, right? He went to and he's kind of from like the middle of nowhere, it's
Mhm.
kind of the Japanese equivalent of like Arkansas or something, and he basically decided to, and look, my mom is from a place like that. So just FYI, but,
I gotcha.
he
He's a
stayed
country
local.
boy.
Yeah, he
He's
stayed, and and because that whole that program is about, hey, we're not gonna recruit from outside of the prefecture, right? And we're gonna win a national champion. With now Kikuchi, Yusei Kikuchi, pitched for the Blue Jays now, so was a couple of years older and took him actually to the championship game. And so I think at that point he kind of saw, oh, like that would be cool if I could be, part of the first team, right, of all local kids from no team from Iwate has ever won a national championship there. And so I think he wanted to be, but like a part of that. And so, what the coach said was, this is a kid who could have, gone to the big school, but chose to stay because he wanted to do something no one had done, something that hadn't been done before. And I think, and, he told me then, I think he's going to pick up a team like that, right? Maybe a team that doesn't have a history, great history with Japanese players and stuff.
Mhm.
And, so the question to me is really like, how much, has like reality been beaten into him, I guess, over the last 6 years, right? I mean, I do think that there was a practical reason to choose the Angels in that they were bad enough when he joined them that they were going to let him he was going to get the leash necessary to figure things out, right? He's with the Dodgers, and I don't know if you remember, but that first spring training was atrocious. I think he had an ERA of like 7 and he
Yeah.
hit like 1 something. He's with the Dodgers. Like he might be getting optioned, right? Forget about playing both ways, And so, I do think that he chose kind of the right team in that sense, right? They gave him the time to kind of figure it out. And, between the arm trouble and, the COVID year even, he was coming off a bad knee thing and he hit under 200 that season.
Mhm.
The Angels gave him time to become the player that he is right now, right? So there were these practical reasons to do it. Now, again, kind of going back to the Nippon Ham comparison there, when he joined Nippon Ham, they had just lost Darvish, right? And they were kind of in this rebuilding phase. And it was kind of a similar thing where the first few years they weren't very good. And kind of by the time he figured it out, now the team was good and they were able to win a championship over there. Now I think the difference here obviously is that like as he figured it out, the Angels didn't get any better. So the question to me is, you have a kid who has shown, and I know he's like smiling at all the time and he kind of looks, right, like kind of this very kind of happy-go-lucky
That's because
kid.
Japanese people are so polite, though. That's why.
Right, correct, right. There's a competitor in there,
Mhm.
and there's a defiance about him, right? And so there is a part of me that thinks, maybe he's going to be like, you know what? People say I can't win here. I'm going to show them,
Mhm.
right? That's entirely possible. Now, I think also, though, he's a smart kid. He's got to have looked around and it's like, okay, well, what the teams, that win, that teams that kind of, right, do well have usually robust farm systems from which they could call people up. I mean, I think the Angels are also conscious of how he perceives their farm system in that, they've been, again, promoting kids, right, putting him into prominent roles early. They brought up, Ben Joyce, who might or might not have been ready to pitch at the major league level. But I think they wanted him to see, hey, we got a kid here. It's throwing 100, 304. Our future's bright here. So, it's kind of that balance, right? Of like, is he still going to kind of stick with the original vision that he had of, okay, I'm going to go over there, and right. I mean, when we think of transcendent athletes too, I mean, you think, say you think of the Chicago Bulls, like, what do you think of? You think of Michael Jordan,
Right.
Before, right? He's bigger than the team almost,
Right.
And just to kind of use a soccer example that nobody might get, like, you think of Napoli. They just won the Serie A title, but you still think of Maradona first, right? It's the first thing that comes into your mind. And so, I think that's kind of the thing probably that he was wanting more, I'm guessing. He's very legacy conscious. He, last year at the All-Star game, he said to me that, or, the group, whatever, that he came at the timing that he did. Keep in mind, he came here at 23 years old, which limited how much he could sign for. Right? I think he wound up signing for a little more than $2 million. Had he waited 2 years, he could have come as a complete unrestricted free agent, signed for 200 plus. And one of the reasons he said, one of the main motivators that brought him here at 23 and, at the expense of $200 million, was that he wants to be a Hall of Famer, and so he thought that by coming, at that age, it would improve his chances of getting into the Hall of Fame. So, that's right. I mean, again, legacy is kind of like, I think, at the forefront, and like,
Okay.
what better way to leave legacy, right, than to take a team like the Angels that have just been bad for so long and turn them into champions.
Well, that's interesting because so many people think that the Dodgers are going to be favorites. I know Tom Verducci of SI wrote a list today on Otani. He has the Dodgers, Padres, Giants, Mets, Rangers, and Mariners as the most likely places to go. Dodgers, they've won World Series before. It's been a very, very long time, in a full 162 since they've done that, 1988. And when I think of Japanese, I mean, they've had successful Japanese players. They've had Hideo Nomo. Padres have never won. Giants have won World Series, but you don't have that one iconic Japanese player that I associate with the Giants. The Mets have Senga right now. Darvish, of course, started with the Rangers. Seattle. Now, I know the fans made him very, very welcome last night, chanting his name, Otani, Otani, Otani. When I think the Seattle Mariners, there's two players that always come to mind. Ken Griffey Jr. is one, but Ichiro Suzuki is the other. How much should we put into the Mariners as a possible destination for Otani?
Yeah, and again, because of that reason, right? I don't see the Mariners. Now, again, that's just me kind of more speculating here, right? I mean, I really don't know, right? I mean, certainly Ichiro and Matsui are the two guys, kind of like from like an age standpoint, right? Like when he was getting into baseball and following baseball as a kid,
they were legends.
Those were the guys that were performing at the top. So, maybe he wouldn't mind following those footsteps. But again, like I kind of really think that like he's going to kind of want to break out and kind of do his own, right? Especially like Ichiro. We got to keep in mind too, right? That like it's when the Japanese kind of gauge, right, their players, right, and measure them. The WBC counts like for like a lot, right?
Okay.
It's a huge part of the legacy. And Ichiro's won two of those, right? And including, right, the one where he drove in the winning run and stuff. And even now, as great as Otani is, if you probably ask people in Japan, like, who's like your greatest player, Otani and Ichiro are still 1A, 1B. And, you kind of go there and now all of a sudden it becomes, it'd be like if LeBron had signed with the Bulls almost, right? It's like you're following is it too close in a way, right? I mean, does your legacy become part of a collective legacy, and again, like, I'm not really sure if that's important to him, but like, if it kind of sounds, again, going back to what the high school coach said of, hey, do something no one else has done before. I just kind of don't see that there. So yeah, but I think that some of the points that you kind of bring up are good, about like the Giants and stuff. The Padres, what is interesting is, and this is just kind of like a small thing, but the Japanese reporters like track like all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And whom he goes to say hi to before games and stuff. And the one thing is, like, say like a former major leaguer shows up, and you're playing in the game, like there's almost kind of this like duty that most people feel to like go say hello to the guy. Otani really doesn't go out of his way too much to say like hi to people, right? Even Kikuchi, again, who preceded him in right, they went to the same high school. The first few years, sure, like he would go over to say hi. But I heard like the last time, for example, that the guy was here, he didn't go say hi to the guy. Oh. And again, it's not everything. But
we're looking for any possible hint at this point.
Yeah, but again, he does go say hi to Darvish.
Yes, I've noticed that.
Right. So again, it's a thing that could be kind of cut both ways, right?
War number 11, like, right, with the Ham Fighters.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. It kind of cuts both ways, though. It's like, one, it's kind of okay. He respects the guy. He obviously feels comfortable with him. On the other hand, Darvish is like the other big, the second biggest Japanese star, and is also much older. There's this kind of weird seniority thing too. It's kind of hard to explain to like Americans where, say two people like go out drinking, for example, right? If you were to do a toast, the younger person in theory is supposed to hold like their glass lower. And I know this, like, right. And there are a bunch of like little, like, kind of like unwritten rules of like, right, the little things that you kind of have to do. I remember a few years ago, I was in spring training and a group of Japanese reporters and I were going to have dinner, right? And everybody was kind of like around my age, right? We were all kind of like early 40s. And, there's a reporter there that I hadn't seen in a while. He was probably about 10 years older than us. And I invite him to come to dinner with us. And he says, you know what, if I go, everybody's going to have to be mindful of me. So I don't want to put that on you guys. Thanks, but no thanks.
Interesting.
So he was mindful of the fact that people were going to have to be mindful of him,
Very
and,
cool.
yeah. And, I saw Daisuke Matsuzaka, at the All-Star game. And we were kind of talking about that, right? And he said, Okajima came when he did. He said, like, they didn't really have, any problems, whatever. That said, he said, the one thing was that, like, yeah, that said, I guess our lockers were next to each other. And so he did say, I did try to be as considerate as I could, right? And now that might not seem like much, but right, once this kind of starts piling up every day, you do kind of wonder, like, I've seen situations where, one guy draws a bigger media crowd than the other, and all of a sudden, like, it gets weird between them. There are a lot of little things, and they don't. I think one thing about Japanese players, again, too, is that they don't really care too much, I think, about the way we perceive them. Their concern is how they're perceived back home. Right. And so all these, like, little, like, insignificant things, what would seem insignificant to us to them could be a bigger deal. Right. I mean, they have sports pages, right? Newspapers that are just, it's all sports, and which story gets played where, like, stuff like that, I think could, and you want to kind of put yourself in that thing, now, look, I think Darvish is, obviously, I'm sure you've gotten to know him. He's a great guy. And when he came here, Kenta Maeda was already here, and Darvish essentially kind of pushed Maeda out of the rotation. That said, as uncomfortable as that situation was in some ways, I think Darvish made it work as much as he could.
Okay.
So
that's a lot to deal with, though, if you're Otani. I mean, he's signed for the next, Darvish for the next 5 years, even though I don't know that he's going to play all those years, but he is signed for quite some time.
Yeah, but Darvish is he's like a legit nice guy, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think everybody's kind of even, and it's not one of those, like, again, some guys, like, the politeness is just kind of built into the culture. So any American that speaks to any Japanese guy will be like, oh, he's a great guy, whatever. But he might not actually be. But Darvish is, like, legitimately, I think everybody is kind of like, no, he's a really, really nice guy. So I do think that, it could work. But again, like, there are these other perception things about, like, legacy and stuff like that. And I'm not really sure. Again, it's hard for me to kind of get into Otani's mind, just because, again, he's very, he's very kind of reserved. He doesn't share very much, right? So, your guess is as good as mine is at this point.
Last thing I'll ask you, though, then, because so much has been written about, the Dodgers. They didn't make this big splash in free agency. They're saving that cap money for, not cap money. They're setting the threshold for Otani. Is money going to be the biggest factor that draws him? Because based on everything you're saying, I'm going to say no.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a threshold of entry, right? So, whether it's 450 million, 500 million, it's like, this is where the bidding kind of starts. Now, I don't think, right, I do think that he wants, again, he came here with the goal of, I want to be the best player in the world. And part of the way you measure that, at least in our culture, is how much a guy gets paid. Right. So I do think he wants a record contract. Now, do I think the difference, is, I don't think, say one team offers 550 and, another offers 600 and he thinks the 550 is a better fit. I think he takes the 550. Right. I mean, again, this kid punted on $200 million earlier. I don't think, and it doesn't sound like he goes out much. The day before media day, actually, right, when they had the media day, he said at that point he had not been out to eat all season. He eats at home. He eats at the ballpark. And then if he gets back after a game and he's still hungry, he'll order room service at the hotel. Like, this guy does not go out. He does not spend money. So the money is kind of more like of a symbolic thing, I think, at that point. Okay. The one thing I will say this about the Dodgers, kind of because of some of the stuff that I said about the way he's kind of wired, I do wonder, because everybody's saying he should go to the Dodgers and everybody thinks he should go to the Dodgers, I kind of wonder if that will actually work against the Dodgers.
Interesting, Dylan. Listen, where can Otani fans find your work? I know LA Times is one. You're on Threads now, right? Hit you up on Threads?
I am Threads, yes. My account for that stuff is all Dylan O. Hernandez. So,
Dylan
that's
O.
Twitter.
Hernandez.
Yeah.
All right, Dylan. Hey, thanks for your time. And if the Angels end up trading him, as it heats up, I may have to hit you up again.
Okay, please do.
Thanks for your time, Dylan.
No, thank you.